and the cost of non-delivery has therefore already been factored into the cost of the purchase. F, that offset programs are usually very complex, technical and bureaucratically heavy arrangements that require close and rigorous international auditing. G, that offset agreements are usually protected by commercial confidentiality clauses that prevent the host government from publishing the full details of the offset projects, thus undermining transparency. And H, the lack of disclosure and oversight may facilitate corruption.
Yes. Now, before you proceed, maybe let us look at the opinion from which paragraph 1.14 is quoted. And that appears on pages 117 to 118. Now, is it...
Mr. Makaka, just for my own understanding, we do have the copy of the legal opinion. Mr. Crawford Brown gave us a copy of that legal opinion already in 2012. I'm not quite certain whether it's necessary for you to go through the legal opinion with him. We do have a copy of the legal opinion. Now, for him to explain, to go through the legal opinion with him, ask him to explain to us what the legal opinion says, I'm not quite sure, if that is necessary. Because it's not his opinion, it's an opinion written by somebody. We do have it.
With your permission, may I respond, Chair? The purpose of the exercise that I am now embarking on is not to require Mr. Crawford Brown to interpret that opinion as appears in the papers. The purpose for which I am taking him to the opinion is thing, and that thing is that paragraph 1.14 is actually a quotation from the book of Paul Holden and Henny van Vieren, to illustrate that the advocate himself is actually quoting the contents of a book.
I've heard him. You can continue if you want to.
Okay, thank you.
Advocate Budlander then declares, quote, "It need hardly be said that these are weighty considerations."
I was just responding to the commissioners, and I requested you to go to this page so that I can be able to ask you a question. Right, thank you. Now, do you agree with me that which you have read under paragraph 1.15, is it 1.15? 1.14, which is then, described as advocate, it says, in his opinion, Advocate Budlander also notes that offsets are internationally discredited because of 8 main reasons. Now, this opinion of his and these reasons that he mentions, the advocate, is actually an extract from the book written by Paul Holden and Henny van Vieren, and which is now factored into this opinion as the basis of his opinion. He's relying on the extract from this book. Is that the case?
That is the case, but I would also say that this is a very valid basis for the objections to offsets that, for instance, are prohibited in terms of the World Trade Organization because they are so distortive of marketing factors.
All, like I have said to the Commission, it's not about talking about the contents or merits and whatever. All what I wanted to highlight is that the advocate is actually relying on an extract from the book for his opinion. Okay. Proceed to the next paragraph, 115.
These are weighty considerations. There appears to be a good deal of evidence which supports the criticisms which have been made. It seems to be, at least prima facie, that there's reason to believe that the use of offsets leads to procurement processes which are neither transparent nor cost-effective and which may not be competitive in the full sense of the word. It follows that if the criticisms of the use of offsets have any substantial validity, and the arms deal procurements were entered into in terms of a system which permitted the use of offsets, they were unlawful because the procurement was not in accordance with a system which is fair, equitable, transparent, competitive, and cost-effective, unquote. Advocate Budlander then deals with the consequences and makes the following 5 comments. A.
Bear with me. Right, now in paragraph 1.15 of your statement does appear in the opinion, which appears on part of the opinion, which appears on pages 118 to 119. Now, for easier reference, I would prefer that then my questions be based on the opinion itself. So let us rather rely or refer to those pages 118 to 119, paragraphs 18, 19, and 20. That is what you have just quoted from this thing. Now, in paragraph 18, you say that the advocate says, it need hardly be said that these are weighty considerations. There appears to be a good deal of evidence which supports the criticism which have been made. Now, when he says there appears to be a good deal of evidence, is he, and I have to ask you because you are the person that gave him the brief, is he referring to this extract of the book written by Holden and Van Vuren? Is he relying on that?
He's not relying on that. That extract is a useful definition, which I would agree with myself, even though I think I've been studying offsets longer than Van Vuren or Holden. Offsets are notorious for their involvement in bribes. They're notorious for distorting trade systems. Yeah.
I think we need to try and spend time covering some mileage in the presentation of evidence. And mileage can be better covered if we respond to the questions that are asked. The focal point of my question is this assertion by the advocate that there appears to be a good deal of evidence. Now, what is this evidence that he is talking about? Are you able to answer that question just briefly without having to explain again the offset issues? If it is, he's basing it on the existence of offsets in the agreement, I think it will be enough to say, well, he's basing it on that, and then we can proceed.
The World Trade Organization, for instance, prohibits, as does the European Union, they prohibit the use of offsets in civil trade because of the notoriety for which offsets have developed. That this really came out of the era of the Comecon in the Soviet Union with trade with its satellites, and there was an awful lot of corruption and malpractices that flowed from there. The armaments industry then took it up, and particularly in terms of Saudi Arabia, and the bribes that were paid to Saudi Arabian princes under the guise of various arms trade transactions. Always the issue is the placement of offsets will develop jobs and whatever and provide technology transfers. The experience has been that the technology transfers do not happen, that the extra costs of the offsets are built into the prices, that the suppliers then walk away from their agreements because they've factored that into the prices, and that when the next arms deal comes up, they'll switch, and there's no follow through. That inappropriate offset projects, if any, are created, and that it really is a scam to fleece the taxpayers, both in the supplier countries and in the recipient countries. So that's why offsets have such a notoriety. But they're prohibited in civil arrangements. But there is an exception provided for national security, and they use that exception to promote weapons proliferation around the world.
What you say informed this assertion in paragraph 18 by the advocate.
In paragraph 18, he says there's a good deal of evidence. And so, for instance, corruption, arms deal contracts between England and Malaysia in the early 1990s were notorious for that. Contracts with Turkey have been notorious for that. So there is evidence. And so, yeah, that's what I'd say. There's a good deal of evidence that offsets you don't get the technology transfers, you don't get the job creation, and that the costs of offsets are simply built into the prices.
Yes, I hear your narrations about this and that. All I'm asking, sir, is that, because this is not your opinion, you sought for an opinion. It's an opinion of the advocate. What you have just said now, the narrations that you have made, are they the basis of this opinion of observing a great deal of evidence by the advocate?
But those were his words that he put into the opinion. Okay.
And turning to page 119, he says at 20, it follows that if the criticism of the use of offsets have any substantial validity. So in this statement, he does not say that there is some validity or any substantial validity on the criticism, but he's saying supposing there is, if there is criticism, is it correct? Thank you. You are going to start dealing with paragraph 1.16. Please go ahead, sir.
Advocate Budlander then deals with the consequences and makes the following 5 comments. A. In the ordinary course, a contract which is contrary to statute is unlawful and unenforceable. That much is trite. B. There are circumstances in which an invalid tender will nevertheless not be set aside. These considerations related in part to the problems which may flow from the declaration that the contract is null and void. The Supreme Court of Appeal has pointed out in this regard, these problems may not be of any consequence in the case of corruption or fraud, where the successful tenderer was complicit in the irregularity. C. That reservation identifies a further consideration which is relevant. There have been well-publicized allegations of corruption or improper purpose in the arms deal. Professor Kuno has pointed out that there is a general principle against the enforcement of such contracts where improper conduct can be established. D. Once fraud is involved, the general approach has been said to be that, in the words of Lord Denning, fraud unravels everything. The principle has more generally been applied as establishing a ground of review of administrative action, even where there is a strict ouster of the jurisdiction of the courts. E. Ordinarily, where a contract is cancelled as invalid, the principle of restitution usually applies. Each party must restore the performance it has received under the contract. This is subject to various qualifications which are not relevant here. Where, however, the cause of cancellation is bribery, the principle becomes quite different. The approach has been set out as follows in K&R Engineering Company, Incorporated, versus the United States. Quote, once a contractor is shown to have been a participant in a corrupt arrangement, he cannot receive or retain any of the amounts payable thereunder. Permitting the contractor to retain amounts already received would create the danger that men inclined to such practices, which have been condemned generally by the courts, would risk violation of the statute, knowing that if detected, they would lose none of their original investment, while if not discovered, they would reap a profit for their perfidy. To deny the government recovery of amounts paid under such tainted contracts would reward those contractors who can conceal their corruption until they have been paid, unquote.
For a better understanding of this opinion and this portion that you have just read into the record, I would like to take you to pages 119 to 120 where this quotation comes from. And again, I am not going to be asking you to try and explain the opinion. All what I would like to highlight is the fact that the advocate, when he deals with this portion, the consequences, because what we are reading from your statement is actually an extract relating to the consequences. Now, it is correct that these consequences that he outlines here, he outlines them without having concluded that the acquisition was unlawful or unconstitutional or illegal. Is that correct?
Issue is whether it met the criteria of the system of 217, and the issue of fraud is a separate matter.
The question is that you agree that in his opinion, the advocate has not made a conclusion that the contracts or the contract in respect of which you sought for the opinion was actually unlawful. What he has done has been to deal with respective topics and then to deal with the section 217 and then to talk about the consequences of any unlawful procurement contract. He does not attribute these consequences to the arms procurement contracts in particular, but he is saying the next question is what the consequences are of an unlawful procurement contract, and then he outlines those consequences. The statement. You may then proceed from paragraph 1.17.
Again, fraud unravels everything. The principle applies that the fraudster should not be allowed to benefit financially from his fraud. In addition, the internationally accepted remedy for fraud is to cancel the contracts, return the goods, and recover the monies. I revert to this matter of cancellation of the arms deal contracts and foreign loan agreements when I deal with the sixth provision of the Commission's terms of reference. Before proceeding to the second provision of the terms of reference, I wish to place on record that my previous evidence leader, Advocate Barry Skinner, in February 2013, undertook to obtain for me the International Offers Negotiating Team and Financial Working Group papers for the arms deal. The Cape High Court awarded discovery to me of these documents in March 2003. In so doing, the court rejected objections by Mr. Manuel and Ms. Maria Ramos that it was not in the national interest to disclose how the government conducts its financial arrangements. Despite 2 applications for contempt of court, Mr. Manuel still continued to refuse to comply with the court order, yet certified in November 2003 that he had finally done so. My letter to Judge Thurieti, dated the 27th of February 2013, informed him that the 9 lever arch files of approximately 3,500 pages of documents offered to me by the Commission as being the IONT and Financial Working Group papers were a mess, albeit they did confirm that Mr. Manuel committed perjury when he certified he'd complied with that Cape High Court discovery order. When Mr. Jayendra Naidu testified on the 9th of June 2014, he stated that the documents referred to as the blue file. Accordingly, I wrote to Advocate Fanyana Mdumbe on the 1st of July asking for the blue file. The Joint Investigating Team JIT report in 2001 had described the IONT and Financial Working Group papers as voluminous and highly professional. Chapter 8 of the JIT report deals with the IONT documents. Chapter 9 of the report deals with the Financial Working Group. Mr. Naidu was unable to answer my questions as to just how many pages the blue file comprised. Pagination numbers on random pages I had previously obtained indicated these documents would comprise at least between 8,000 and 9,000 pages. Advocate Ndumbi, together with Advocate Moses...
Crawford Brown, I'm sorry. And can we go back to that 1.20, paragraph 1.20 on page 15? I didn't quite follow what you were saying here. The passage, albeit that they did confirm that Mr. Manuel committed perjury when he certified that he had complied with the Cape High Court discovery order. Who suppose have confirmed that Mr. Manuel committed perjury?
I came to the Commission's offices in February last year, sir, to have a look at the IONT and Financial Working Group papers that had been offered to me. There were 9 lever arch files. The volume alone confirmed that after the discovery order in 2003, Mr. Manuel provided 18 pages to my advocate, but told him that I was not allowed to see them, and that he could not communicate the contents to me. That these were not the documents on which the Cabinet had made the decision for the arms deal procurements. I went to court again, got 224 pages, and immediately again I realized that these were not in compliance with the court order. So at that point, Mr. Manuel provided me with 224 pages. We're now looking at a question of whether there are 17,000 pages that comprise the IONT and Financial Working Group papers. And there's a huge amount of difference of documents that have been and have not been included. So on volume terms alone, I did not receive the documentation to which I was entitled in terms of that discovery order back in 2003.
All I wanted to know is who confirmed that Mr. Manuel committed perjury.
He had certified in 2003 that he'd complied with the court order. It's very evident he did not.
But who confirmed this in the context of this paragraph? Who confirmed it?
The volume of the evidence confirms it.
Maybe I should leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Chair. Will you please proceed to page 15? That's where you are. Page 16. Okay. 1.23. Thank you.
Dumbi, together with Advocate Moses Nkaka and Ms. Ramakaka, flew to Cape Town on the 12th of September to discuss the matter and agreed to obtain the blue file. The pagination in the blue file suggested it should contain not just 8,000 to 9,000 pages, but over 17,000 pages. 2 copies of the blue file were couriered to me on the 18th of September 2014. Instead, however, of the expected 17,000 pages, the blue file comprises less than 400 pages. It therefore falls far short of what might be described as voluminous. Yet the pagination ranges from 17,098 to 17,464. This suggests that whilst the IONT and Financial Working Group papers were indeed voluminous, only a small fraction of those documents were included in the blue file. Most notably missing from the blue file are documents that had been included in Mr. Naidu's package of documents submitted to the Commission. These include the recommendation on the Alpha package, which as pages 17,101, 17,102, and 17,103, plus annexures, were the minutes of the meeting of a subcommittee of the Cabinet Ministers held on the 26th of May, 1999. Deputy President Thabo Mbeki, Ministers Joe Modise, Alec Irwin, and Stella Sikau attended that meeting. Ministers Manuel and Casserols tendered their apologies. The annexures pertaining to the procurement of the Grippens recommended the procurement should be deferred, failing which the tender should be scrapped. The reasons given include the Grippens at a cost of 11.1 billion rand, and thus by far the greatest expense, are not required immediately. The South African Air Force already has 50 Cheetah fighter aircraft, but only 9 pilots capable of flying them. And the foreign exchange currency risks. Amongst the documents I would have expected to see are the umbrella supply agreements, such as the BAE agreement in my possession, stemming from the Diesel Management System court case, plus the Barclays Bank and Commerzbank loan agreements, and various memos about terms and conditions. But these, apparently in August 1999, were still under negotiation. For instance, the BAE supply agreement in my possession is paginated 00002 to 82, and the German frigate agreement is 0194 to 01352. Between that meeting on the 26th of May and the presentation of the affordability study on the 31st of August 1999, the recommendations regarding the BAE Saab Gripen veered from should be deferred, failing which the tender should be scrapped, to the bewildering status of not an option to purchase, but instead an option to cancel. The executive summary of the affordability studies declares, quote, "It was generally accepted that it is risky to make procurement so far ahead of the actual requirement. On the other hand, the procurement of the Gripen from BAE Saab was perceived as generating substantial benefits through the strength of their industrial participations offer and the role of BAE Saab in Denel. As a result, the Ministerial Committee decided to defer the procurement of the Alpha Gripen and mandated the negotiating team to explore the possibility of taking an option which would allow BAE Saab to supply Gripen to the SANDF at a future time on condition that this did not lead to a price premium or technological obsolescence, and on the basis that BAE Saab would continue their participation in Denel and would deliver on their DIP and NIP commitments in the meantime. In response to this proposal from the NT, BAE Saab have indicated this option would not assist them with the promotion of the Gripen into new international markets. Hence, they would not be able to deliver on their DIP commitments, which are linked to the Gripen, and work related to the Gripen going to Denel would also not materialize, thus affecting the viability of Denel. In the circumstances, there was little incentive for them to undertake their NIP commitments in advance. As an alternative, BAE has proposed a combination transaction for the supply of 24 Hawk and 28 Gripen. The offer involves the supply of a combination of Hawk and dual-seater Gripen up front, with an option to the South African government to cancel on the remaining Hawk, followed by another option to cancel on the single-seater Gripen. These issues are dealt with in greater detail on pages 203, 204, and 205 of the documents, the bundle of documents. In essence, this meant that South Africa was being used by BAE Saab as a marketing exercise and a guinea pig to promote Swedish exports of the Gripen to other countries. The Gripen had proven to be a political and financial disaster in Sweden, and the Swedish government was desperate to recoup some of the costs by exports to so-called third world countries. Per paragraphs 1.4 and 1.41 and 1.42 below, the matter continues to be, even in 2014, to be highly contentious in Sweden, given allegations that the new Swedish Prime Minister, whilst then a trade union official, facilitated the laundering of BAE bribes back in 1998. 7 books have been written on the arms deal, including my 2 books. In this respect, I also draw the Commission's attention to the chapter on commissions in the book The Law of South Africa, Part 2, on page 150, which quotes, The duty to act fairly does not mean, however, that a commission is bound by rules of evidence applicable to a court of law. A commission is responsible for collecting evidence and obtaining statements from witnesses. It may receive evidence either orally or in writing. It may consider information of any nature, including hearsay evidence and newspaper reports, or even submissions and representations that are nothing more than opinions, unquote. This issue of information of any nature is also highly germane, given my reference below, to come in paragraphs 530 to 539 to the Debevoise and Plimpton report on the Ferrestyle German submarine consortium attitude to offsets as being simply vehicles to pay bribes, as well as the Commission's previous exclusions of documentation or evidence. Archbishop Tutu had sent me to Stockholm in his place in June 1998 to attend a conference debating the politically contentious issues of Swedish arms exports. These issues and heavy lobbying by the Swedish government on behalf of BAE Saab are covered in my book Eye on the Money from pages 131 to 133 and again on page 141. But also missing from the blue file are memos and recommendations by Mr. Roland White, who headed the IOT team.
Yeah, on 1.34, I think it's just to bring it to our attention that there's just a minor mistake here, because Ronald White did not head the IONT team. He headed the finance working group team, and you do agree? And I request that the statement be amended to read as such that White, who headed the finance working group team, in page 19. Has the amendment been effected? Should we proceed? Thank you.
Thank you. Also missing from the blue file are memos and recommendations by Mr. Roland White, who headed the financial working team. Mr. White left the Treasury for a job with the World Bank in Washington. He was reportedly so in fear for his life that he refused to return to South Africa in July 2001 to testify at the Public Protector's hearings into the arms deal. Why has Mr. White not been subpoenaed to testify at this commission, given his key role in the affordability and financing of the arms deal, including the whole issue of offsets?
On Mr. White, are you aware of the fact that Mr. White did give evidence through a video? Yes.
As he gave evidence by video, he refused to return to the country. I don't know if he's still in Washington or where he is.
And are you aware that in the conference or in the evidence that he gave, he also alluded to the fact that the procurement was good?
I would dispute that.
I'm sorry, Ms. Smith. We couldn't hear your last question.
Oh, sorry, Chair. Mr. White alluded to the fact that the procurement deal itself was a good procurement or was a good deal. That's the question I've asked. And the witness has said he denies it.
Would not be my interpretation of what he said.
Right, then you can then proceed.
Just before we proceed, in that same paragraph, it is stated that he was reportedly so, and in caused fear for his life. Reported by whom? Where does Mr. Crawford Brown get his information from?
This is newspaper coverage of the circumstances of the time in 2001 and why he had to be interviewed by video rather than coming to South Africa. He refused to come back to South Africa. I don't know if he's ever been back to South Africa since then, but that was the atmosphere of the time. And as I say, I don't know if he's ever come back or where he is now.
Shall we proceed, Chair? Thank you. 1.35, please, Mr.
Offsets were not simply a nice-to-have clever gimmick to reduce the costs of warships and warplanes. The Defence White Paper in 1996 acknowledged that eradication of poverty was South Africa's overriding security priority and that there was no foreign conceivable military threat. As examination-in-chief in June 2014 by Mr. Ronnie Caswells by advocate Simi Sebalala confirmed, a clever confidence trick had to be devised. That confidence trick was the offset program devised by the European arms industry and governments with collusion by the Ministers of Defence and of Trade and Industry, Messrs. Modise and Alec Irwin. That extraordinary confidence trick that was 30 billion rand spent on armaments would somehow generate 110 billion rand in offsets.
Now, what is the basis of stating that Mr. Caswells confirmed that a clever confidence trick had to be devised?
The transcript of the hearings in June will confirm there was a long discussion back and forth as to what the meanings were of particular cabinet discussions and how they were having they were having to disguise what the meaning was of the benefits of the arms deal, and the figures were subsequently hugely inflated from 6 billion on.
So, Ms. Ramachara, before we proceed with this, can I ask Mr. Crawford Brown to check the transcript tonight so that tomorrow morning we can get the relevant portions of what he's saying? Because I cannot recall any of these things being said in this commission. But then, he seems to recall. Can you just check the transcript so that he can make the relevant pages available to us?
Those transcripts can be made available, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, but I sat over there while he was sitting here.
Yes, we will request for copies from the commission, Chair, and avail them to him. Shall we then proceed to the next paragraph? This one will then be deferred to tomorrow for further clarity. Page 20 is 1.37.
The annexures to the Alpha recommendation, as well as the affordability study, confirm that BAE was expected to take over Denel, and hence the defence industrial participation programs would generate sufficient offset benefits for South Africa. The reality, however, is that BAE's due diligence study of Denel revealed such massive financial and environmental liabilities that even BAE balked and the takeover never materialised. Per the late Mr. Modise's speech in Parliament in 1999, which I quoted in greater detail in my written submission back in June 2012, it is the offsets that drove the bribery and culture of corruption which the arms deal unleashed. Again, I ask, where in the world does one spend 30 rand to get 110 rand back in change? I remind the Commission of the dictum, if it sounds too good to be true, it invariably is.
On what basis do you submit that it is the offsets that drove the bribery and culture of corruption, which the arms deal unleashed? And I'm asking you this question based on the background that has already been painted, that the offsets had been in use for quite some time, and actually at the time of the conclusion of the acquisition contracts, the offsets had actually been legislated. It was part of the policies of the government.
And that is the point that the National Industrial Participation Program, adopted in 1997, following lobbying by representations by Arms Corps and DTI to make all government foreign procurements in excess of $10 million had to have this offset component. My contention is that is incompatible with Section 217 of the Constitution, and that the whole history of what used to be referred to as counter-trade and now as offsets is internationally notorious with a reputation for corruption as well as market manipulation, and that there are, for instance, 160 pages of affidavits that show the bribes paid for the BAE contracts, and the Debevoise Plimpton report makes the point that offsets were simply a vehicle to pay bribes.
Sorry, Chair, can I please interrupt? I represent Verstel. I'm here on behalf of Weber Wenzel, and I just wanted to make it known to the Commission that our client Verstel has objected to the admission of the report on the basis that it is legally privileged. And I would just like to get a ruling from you, Chair, whether, I know we've had a few references to the report this morning and this afternoon, whether those references will be admitted in Mr. Crawford Brown's testimony. And if so, whether the Commission can please stand down, as Ferristel would like to brief Council.
Mr. Chair, if I can assist, previously, on behalf of Mr. Shlongwane, I previously objected on the very same basis to the document, and as far as I can recall, you did in fact made a ruling in that regard on the basis that it is, on the face of it, privileged. We can check the record and find the specific place.
Maybe one should also add that we're not hearing this for the first time, that Ferristel still claim privilege over that document. In fact, we do. I think up to now we've received almost 2 letters from Weber Wenzel confirming that point, that that document is not, that their clients have not relinquished privilege over that document. But then, if I'm not wrong, I think in this document I've seen a paragraph where there's an allegation that at some stage Ferristel end up abandoning their privilege over that document. I'm not sure whether shouldn't we wait until we come to that paragraph, which I think Mr. Crawford Brown is going to deal with, before we take a firm decision one way or the other. I agree, Advocate Sile is correct. The last time we had problems with this document. Shouldn't we just allow Mr. Crawford Brown so that his evidence can flow? And then once he comes to that paragraph which he deals with the question of whether your client has abandoned privilege over that document or not, only then should we deal with that issue. Mr. Crawford Brown, am I right? I know we have received 34 versions of your statement. I hope the paragraph that I'm referring to is contained in the last version that you gave us, because this last version, it was given to us just before we came here.
Just one point in this report. Ferristel spent a considerable amount of money, more than 60...
Mr. Crawford Brown, just listen to my question very carefully. I'm not asking you about that report. The question that I'm asking is that you have given us 34 versions of your statement. But then I know that in one of the statements that I read over the weekend or something like that, you are dealing with a question of whether that document is privileged or not. The question that I'm asking you is, in this last version, which was given to us this morning, are you still dealing with that question of privilege of that report or not?
If I may, sir, may I read from this reference, the Law of South Africa, 2nd edition, in the...
Mr. Crawford Brown, for the last time, please listen to the question.
I'm listening. Yes, sir.
Just listen to what I'm saying and answer only what I'm saying. In one of the statements that was given to us, because I think up to now you've given us your 3rd version of the statement. I remember the version of the statement that I read over the weekend. You deal with the allegation that Ferristel report is not privileged, because I think you said something like, because management of Ferristel wanted to cleanse their reputation by releasing this document. Now my question is, that paragraph, is it contained in this version of the report that you gave to us this morning, or is only in the previous versions of your statement?
It's in this version as well. I haven't altered that aspect at all. I haven't altered that aspect in this version that's just been signed this morning. That statement remains. That Ferristel released, although it says privileged, Debevoise and Plimpton are known to have released that document for a wider audience. It came to me, and it is therefore the prerogative of the Commission, I would suggest, to include it in terms of the the rules of evidence determining for commissions. This is a very critical issue as to how we address why the bribes were involved in the offsets.
Just hold on, Mr. Crawford. You are still not answering my question. Ms. Ramakaha, what is the position? Well, I don't seem to be getting any right answer from Mr. Crawford Brown.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to assist in this respect. Yes, it is true that paragraph is paragraph 5.13. And may I just 5.30, but may I also just indicate to the commissioners that the changes that have been effected to the statement has been to supplement the statement. So nothing has been redacted from the statement. Anything that you would have read yesterday or when you received the first draft or second draft still remains in the statement. I'm just highlighting this moving forward so that you are assured that nothing has been redacted from the statement. Thank you.
Sorry, Chair. We are aware of the allegation. So we are aware of the allegation, and our client strongly denies that it has been placed in the public domain on purpose. And in the interest of fairness, we ask that we have time to brief counsel in order to properly prepare if, in fact, that the Commission does decide to admit that report into evidence.
Can I perhaps suggest this, Mr. Crawford Brown, can you defer the question of reference to this document, to that report, until we have heard what the Federal Staff Council is saying? Can you deal with all other issues except the question of that report until we have heard what the Council of Federal Staff has got to say?
Yes, sir. I think I only get back to that in Section 5. So we're now still on Section 1. So it comes up in Section 5.3.
Ms. Ramakaha?
Thank you, Chair. We will accept the suggestion made by the commissioners that this portion of the evidence be deferred until counsel for Ferrostal has been heard. The only thing that bothers us is the time frames, certainty about when she says we need time. And I think it needs to be defined as to what is time.
Let's first deal with the principle. The question of time, we'll deal with it later, because once the principle is a great report, I was going to suggest that we start tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, we hear them, so that we can be in a position to proceed. I didn't have in mind that, we'll wait for another 2 weeks before we come to that issue.
As it pleases the commissioners, yes, we are agreeable to this portion of the evidence being stood down until tomorrow.
Thank you. Let me hear. Can your counsel be here tomorrow morning to address us on that question?
Yes, tomorrow would be fine.
Can we start at 9 o'clock so that, by 10 o'clock we are back to our witness?
It's 9 o'clock, do you say? That's great.
I hope there's no objection from other legal representatives that we start at 9 o'clock. We hear arguments so that we can proceed with Mr. Crawford Brown.
It's fine with us, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Chair. That should be fine.
That will be in order, Chair.
That's in order, Chair.
Thank you. Then we'll start tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock with your counsel, and then from there we'll go back to Mr. Crawford Brown. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Shall we then proceed?
appears in paragraph 1.37. 1.37 on page 20.
Yes, in what respect, sir?
In particular, the reality, however, is that BAE's due diligence study of Denel revealed such massive financial and environmental liabilities that even BAE borrowed and the takeover never materialized. Where do we get this information from? Is there any document from which this passage is extracted?
This was information that came to me from the whistleblowers, but I was also aware that the intention of BAE was to license Denel to manufacture weapons in South Africa for export to countries such as Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, that had human rights difficulties, so that the British could then claim that these were weapons supplied from South Africa rather than from Britain, to avoid the human rights implications of that. So the intention was, and this comes out as Mr. Modise's intention with promoting the BA contracts, that Denel as its major offset component the BAE as its major offset component would take over Denel. That never materialized.
When you talk about the reality is that, etc., the reality is what was conveyed to you by other people?
I was involved also in 2002. I was asked to investigate whether Denel in Cape Town at its Swartklip plant was manufacturing components for cluster bombs in violation of the Ottawa Convention. That led into awareness of what had gone on at the Swartklip plant since 1948 as initially a fireworks plant that was then used for manufacture of ammunition. And the huge contamination that resulted, that has probably irreparably damaged the aquifer under the Swartklip land. It's about 571 hectares of land. The then CEO of Denel testified before the Department of Public Works Committee in Parliament to say it was untenable to have an ammunition plant in a residential area such as Khayelitsha and Mitchell's Plain. And Swartklip has now been closed down. It remains, it appears, hugely contaminated, and apparently this kind of thing is repeated elsewhere, and that is what had prompted, for instance, the other plant in Cape Town is at Somchem outside Somerset West. We don't know the extent of the contamination there, but apparently the contamination at Swartklip is very substantial. It needs proper environmental study to actually confirm that, but it does seem that was the story we heard during the defence review, that even BAE was having qualms about getting involved with taking over Denel.
I don't quite follow. I must confess. Are you saying this information came out during a discussion of the defence review?
Defence review, and as I say, the whistleblowers. I'm not the whistleblower. I'm simply a voice for the whistleblower. But I was representing the Anglican Church at the Defence Review, where we were saying poverty eradication, not weapons, is our priority.
I don't quite follow. But let me leave it there.
Maybe let me try. 1.37. The allegations that we are making in this paragraph, is there any documents that you can give to the Commission to support these allegations?
As you will see from the recommendation on the Alpha Gripen project, the documentation that was annexed to the cabinet minutes, the prime offset intention was for BAE to take over Denel. That was the prime offset, and you'll pick that up from that annexure. That hasn't happened, and so the reason, evidently, was that they had a look at the liabilities of Denel, both financial and environmental, and then walked away from it. And I think you'll also pick that up from the draft JIT disc, which I've now made available to the Commission, which is a report of 741 pages that has not previously been made available.
Now, what did the whistleblower say to you? If it told you said that information is contained in the documents that you referred us to.
No, the whistleblowers were not referred to in the document. The document I've just provided, the disc I've provided to the Commission, is the draft JIT report that was edited down from 741 pages to 380 pages in the period October 2001 to November 2001. The whole tenure and thrust of that draft report is dramatically different from the report that went to Parliament in November 2001, and I would suggest the Commission would find it dynamite to go through the conclusions of that report, and in particular the interference by the then Minister of Defence, Mr. Modise.
Mr. Clover, can you do us a favor? Tell us about that dynamite that we'll find in that report. What
drove the BAE project and the Hawks and the Gripens was Mr. Modise's expectation that BAE would take over Denel. And that is why BAE was driven and given preference, to which even the Auditor General objected in various forms in 98 and 99, that BAE had been given undue preference. And the reason for that undue preference is the expectation that BAE would take over Denel as its offset contribution. And that's why cost was removed from consideration in the acquisition program for the BAE contracts. It's Mr. Modise's so-called visionary approach.
We have seen the minutes of meetings where this visionary approach appears, but there's absolutely no mention of Denel being taken over by BAE.
That you'll find in the annexures that were provided in Mr. Naidu's bundle of documents, as the annexures to the Cabinet Minister meeting of May 1999.
We say those documents contain the information to the effect that BAE was supposed to take over Denel. Will we find that in those?
On Denel, and in fact that comes up elsewhere in the affordability study.
Well, we will have a look at it.
Right, thank you. Mr. Crawford Brown, the next paragraph that you are invited to deal with and proceed to the rest until advised otherwise. It's paragraph 1.39.
Chairperson Judge Sariti will recall that in August 2012, I requested the former British Prime Minister Tony Blair to be subpoenaed to testify about the bribes and pressures he exerted on our government on behalf of BAE. Regrettably, the chairperson ruled that it was premature to subpoena Mr. Blair, a man who is widely regarded internationally as a war criminal. The opportunity was thus lost to investigate the roles of BAE and the Bank of England in deliberate destabilization of resource-rich countries in Asia and Africa. Not only is Mr. Blair remembered for his lies in 2003 about Iraqi weapons of mass destruction, but he is now closely associated with the wars both in the Democratic Republic of Congo and in Palestine. I will revert to this matter later. The Swedish TV4 in 2012 exposed the role back in 1998 of the new Swedish Prime Minister Stefan Löfven, who has just come to office, in facilitating BAE bribery payments of 30 million rand to ANC MPs, which were laundered via Swedish trade unions as funding for an industrial training school. I came to this information in December 1998 when NUMSA shop stewards asked me to speak to them on offsets. This was early December 1998, and NUMSA was split on the whole issue of the arms deal and the issue of offsets. And at that time, I was informed that Swedish trade unions were transferring funds described as funding for an industrial training school, but which were in fact bribes to ANC members of parliament to get them to support the arms deal.
Just on Mr. Clover, by whom were you told?
The education officer for the National Union of Metal Workers.
Who? What is his name? Can we get his details, because we might want to follow this information up with him?
But his name was Dinga Sikwebo, and he was corroborated by his colleagues.
Just hold on and say, what was his name?
Dinga Sikwebo. He was the education officer at the National Union for Metal Workers.
How does one write his name?
Dingusikwebu, I think it is. Okay.
Mr. Brown, can we just spell it slowly so that we can write the name down?
D-I-N-G-A Dinga Sikwebo S-I-K-W-E-B-U. And he was corroborated by his colleagues. I spent the day with them in early December 1998.
Thank you.
Mr. Löfven, in 1998, was then the international officer for the Swedish Chemical and Metal Workers Union, and the bribes were alleged to be laundered via Sanko and Mr. Moses Maikiso. This illustrates the extent of corruption in the international arms trade, even in squeaky clean Sweden. After my request in that
bribes were alleged to be laundered via Sanko and Mr. Moses Maikiso. Where did you get this information from?
The NUM shop stewards. Mr. Moses Maikiso had been chair of NUMSA prior to that, and he was at that time a member of parliament.
Yes, the question is who gave you the information?
Dinga Sikwebo and his colleagues.
Among the colleagues, is it Dinga Sikwebo, the only one whose name you know? Or was he the main person that's leading the discussions?
The main person, but there was another man called Gibson. Gibson. No, Gibson was his first name. I don't remember his last name.
Was he also from the union? Which union? NUMSA. And are there any documents that they gave you, or was it just oral discussion?
It was all oral. So at that point, I then used my contacts in Sweden to try to verify whether this was in fact the case. As I mentioned, I'd been in Sweden earlier in June 1998, and Swedish TV1 then sent a team to look at the whole issue of Sweden's involvement in marketing the grapens in South Africa. So I had established some connections with TV1. They were able to confirm the payment, but thereafter the shutters came down. They couldn't get any. They confirmed payment, but they couldn't give me any details. So it was then at that point, through my connections with Campaign Against Arms Trade in London, I asked the British government to investigate whether BAE was laundering bribes via 2 Swedish trade unions. The then Secretary for Trade and Industry, Stephen Bayers, appointed Scotland Yard to investigate the issue. Scotland Yard and Inspector Harvey contacted me a couple of times. I put him in touch with Mr. Sikwebu. Eventually it came back to us that it was not illegal in England to bribe foreigners, and therefore there was no crime for Scotland Yard to investigate. That was 98 into early 1999.
And you may proceed then.
So that takes us to...
These bribes were indeed paid.
They were transferred. Then there has subsequently been a TV documentary in 2012, but that's a Swedish TV documentary which exposed the role of Mr. Lofgren in facilitating these bribery payments to his friend Mr. Moses Mayakiso. And in fact, there was a press statement from the ANC in July 1999 confirming payment for an industrial training school. So that, in fact, became the basis on which the investigation then flowed by TV4 when it exposed this in November 2012 in a documentary on Swedish TV4.
I was referring to the investigation British authorities, who then said that it was not illegal in English law at the time to bribe foreigners. Did those investigators, the Scotland Yard people, confirm that indeed these bribes were paid?
They just said there's nothing for them to investigate. They then led the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, in 1997 to introduce the Conventions Against Bribery of Foreign Officials. That was 1997. But Britain continued to refuse to pass implementing legislation on that until after 2001, when the Americans, after 9/11, put pressure on the Europeans to actually implement their commitments in terms of the OECD conventions. So Britain had, at that point in 1997, had signed the OECD conventions, but there was no implementing legislation. So at that point, in terms of British law, it was obviously illegal to bribe Englishmen, but foreigners were fair game. And that was also true in Germany, where bribes could even be deducted as a useful business expense, tax deducted.
Yeah, what I have asked is whether the British, when you're communicating with them, did they describe the activity as bribery, or did they use different vocabulary? That's all I'd like to know.
Them to investigate. There's nothing for them to investigate. The brief I had asked through Campaign Against Arms Trade was for the British government to investigate whether BA was laundering bribes to South Africans via 2 Swedish trade unions. As I say, the Secretary for Trade and Industry detailed Scotland Yard. Scotland Yard contacted me. Eventually, came back to me. It was not illegal in English law to bribe foreigners, and therefore there was no task for Scotland Yard to undertake.
So they said it was not criminal. Okay.
It's not criminal.
Then proceed to the next paragraph.
Affidavits from Mr. Gary Murphy, an investigator at the British Serious Fraud Office, and Colonel Johan Duploy, previously of the Scorpions and now with the Hawks, detail how and why BA laundered bribes of £115 million, or 2 billion rand approximately, to secure its warplane contracts with South Africa, to whom those bribes were paid, and to which bank accounts were credited. The names of prominent beneficiaries of those BAE bribes include Fana Shlangwana, John Bredenkamp, and the late Richard Charter. Mr. Shlangwana, it will be recalled, was the advisor to the former Minister of Defence, the late Joe Modise. Although it may not have been illegal in 1998-1999 in Britain or Germany to bribe foreigners, it has long been illegal in South Africa to receive bribes. As Minister of Finance, as well as the senior member of the ANC's National Executive Committee, Mr. Manuel had both fiduciary and constitutional obligations to investigate all allegations of bribery and corruption. Instead, and in gross abuse of those responsibilities, Mr. Manuel actively engaged in a cover-up of corruption and fraud associated with the arms deal.
Will you please elaborate on the basis upon which you submit that Mr. Manuel actively engaged in cover-up of corruption and fraud associated with the arms deal?
Or was an issue that came up regarding Mr. Feinstein's book After the Party, where he recorded a lunch he had with Mr. Manuel, and in Mr. Manuel's testimony, he blustered his way, or attempted to bluster his way, to say that JM could refer to Julius Malema or Mr. Another man whose letters were JZ.
So the basis of this statement is some extract from the book After the Party of Feinstein.
It comes up in that book, but as we know subsequently, at the Scopa investigations in 2001, Mr. Manuel was a very active participant in trying to squelch the Scopa investigation. So although there were allegations of corruption, he and his colleagues did absolutely nothing to try to investigate them.
Why do you say that Mr. Manuel was very active in trying to squash the Scopa investigation?
There was a meeting recorded in February 2001, and I think Renate Talliot has also referred to it both in her book as well as in her testimony, as the pressure put on Scopa by the ministers to squelch the parliamentary investigation.
Now, in this respect, I think it will be proper just to indicate to you that Dr. Woods, as well as Ms. Dalliard, have testified before the Commission, and none of them has said that Mr. Manuel tried to squash the Scopa investigation, and also none of them has stated that Mr. Manuel was actively engaged in cover-up of corruption and fraud associated with the arms deal.
With respect, I would suggest the transcript of that meeting in the Marx building in Cape Town in February 2001 would confirm the opposite, and I think I do refer to it in my book, Eye on the Money.
My question relates to the two witnesses, Dr. Woods, who at the relevant time was the chairperson of Scopa, and Ms. Dalliard, who became a member of Scopa some time later, but she had started to participate within the Scopa environment as far back as around, I think, November 99 or so. Yeah. So I'm just bringing it to your attention that there are these two witnesses that have testified who had a relationship with Scopa, who have not stated that Mr. Manuel was actively engaged in the cover-up, or even that he tried to squash the investigation.
As I say, the transcript of that meeting, it was about a 4-hour meeting, would suggest otherwise. But in addition, there is also the 13-page letter to Dr. Woods, purportedly from Mr. Zuma as head of government business, which subsequently became revealed as having originated from Mr. Mbeki, which also squelched that investigation.
Right. I think the issue of that letter is something that will be addressed later when we deal with the contents of your books, because I think that's where you elaborate on that letter. For now, let us just try to be focused on what we are dealing with. When I ask you questions, Mr. Crawford Brown, I'm not asking questions to suggest that I agree or I don't agree with what has been said. I think it's only proper that anything that I'm aware of that may be contrary to what you are saying, I should bring to your attention for you to comment. So it's not an invitation to defend or to do anything, but just to bring it to your attention, and then you respond to that. And then the rest that needs to be dealt with will still be dealt with at the right time, at the right moment when we deal with relevant portions of your statement.
I think the Commission is, however, very aware of that passage in Mr. Feinstein's book, After the Party.
You may. We are still on page 22. Will you then please proceed to paragraph 1.47?
The Sunday Times expose on the 28th of September about bribes allegedly paid to President Jacob Zuma for assistance in blocking investigation into the Thompson CSF highlights the abuse of state institutions since 1999, especially the National Prosecuting Authority, to cover up the arms deal scandal. These revelations are not new, but they do confirm the malevolent roles of European governments in fostering corruption in countries such as South Africa.
Why do you see that the National Prosecuting Authority was involved in trying to cover up the arms deal scandal?
Because whenever evidence was taken to the National Prosecuting Authority, it very conveniently did nothing about it, including a request for seizure of bribes paid to Mr. Shlongwane that had been frozen in Liechtenstein.
Somewhere later in your statement, you deal with the prosecuting authorities' conduct. So I will not pursue then this aspect at this moment. Will you then proceed to paragraph 1.4a?
Whilst I still await the International Office negotiating team and financial working group papers, of which I was awarded discovery by the Cape High Court in 2003, I have late on Wednesday, the 1st of October 2014, obtained a disc of the draft copy of the Joint Investigating Team report. I have now made a disc of this draft JIT report available to the Commission for its comparison of the draft with the published report tabled in Parliament in November 2001. The draft runs to 741 pages instead of the 380-page document. Very cursory examination of the draft reveals massive editing to dilute disclosures that were highly critical of the arms deal tendering procedures. It's been alleged that such doctoring of the JIT report took place in President Mbeki's office during October 2001. It has also been alleged that this was when an executive summary was inserted into the JIT report to exonerate the President and the ministers, and which declares, quote, no
I'm
evidence...
sorry, Mr. Crawford Brown, before you proceed. You say that it has been alleged that such doctoring of the JIT report took place. Alleged by whom? And secondly, the very next paragraph, you say that it has been alleged. It has also been alleged this was when an executive summary was inserted. Alleged by whom?
Okay, I received this disc from Dr. Richard Young on Wednesday evening. Dr. Richard Young. I received the disc from him, and they are his allegations. He received that disc as a result of court litigation to obtain the draft copies, which he then has compared over some time with the published report and has found them to be major discrepancies.
So do I understand you to be saying that the person who made that allegation is Dr. Richard Young?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. And just to conclude that, you say it is Dr. Young who has had the opportunity to do the comparisons and then gave you information on some highlights.
He undertook litigation to obtain that draft report, and on the basis of that court award, he gave me a disc of the draft report, and he's studied it quite extensively over the years.
Okay, will you proceed then?
In the published JIT report, said no evidence was found of any improper or unlawful conduct by the government. The irregularities or improprieties referred to in the findings as contained in this report point to the conduct of certain officials of government departments involved and cannot, in our view, be ascribed to the President or the ministers involved in their capacities as members of the Ministers' Committee or Cabinet. There are therefore no grounds to suggest that the government's contracting position is flawed. Unquote. By contrast, and in respect of the offset program, the draft JIT report declares in paragraph 13.3...
I'm sorry. Mr. Mahan, the witness seems to be dealing with a new point. Will this not perhaps be an appropriate moment to adjourn until tomorrow?
Till tomorrow.
So I think we're going to adjourn until tomorrow. And tomorrow I think we'll start at 9 o'clock in order to deal with the question of that report. Yeah, good. Mr. Brown, we're going to adjourn until tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. And tomorrow we'll start slightly earlier than we did today. We'll start at 9 o'clock. All right, Mr. Makaka, 9 o'clock.
That's fine. Yes, sir.
Advocate Mpaha, 9 o'clock. Thank you. We'll adjourn until tomorrow.
I'm going to cover it.
SABC iserver idown.